President Bush, you're about to enter Scarborough country. No passport required. No more Mr. Nice Guy allowed. As President Bush's credibility ratings fall, Democrats dig in deeper. Is it time for the commander-in-chief to fight back? And John Kerry trumps President Bush in a recent poll. But could the Vietnam issue be his undoing? We'll debate it. A Vanity Fair expose said that Michael Jackson plied several boys with wine. Now in an NBC exclusive, one boy steps forward to say that story is completely untrue. And with a deficit of $500 million and growing, President Bush wants to double federal funding of abstinence-only programs. Is this really the best way to spend taxpayer dollars? And NBA legend AC Green will be here to weigh in on that debate. The Bush machine is broken down. It's time for tonight's Real Deal. You know, for months, the president's been bashed by Democratic candidates angling for his job. And for months, Americans have been hearing that their president is a liar who conned his way into war so fat cat buddies could make billions of dollars. The White House has remained strangely quiet and refused to spend its $150 million on campaign ads to defend the president's record and honor. Now, my sources are telling me that the White House is not worried. They're just waiting for the right time to launch their counteroffensive against John Kerry. Meanwhile, their man's poll numbers have reached record lows, and John Kerry's about to take a double-digit lead over the September 11th president. You know, the longer the White House waits, the weaker the president's poll numbers are sure to get, and the more likely that Bush 43 will be a one-time wartime president, just like his old man, Bush 41. And that's tonight's Real Deal. Now, John Kerry and the Democrats smell blood in the water, with the president's poll numbers plummeting to record lows. The National Guard crisis has damaged the president's credibility, and veterans groups are quickly choosing sides between President Bush and Senator John Kerry. With us now is Ted Sampley. He's the leader of Vietnam veterans against John Kerry. Now, Ted, as a strong George Bush supporter, I want to read you what Colin Powell said in his autobiography. Quote, "I'm angry that so many sons of the powerful and well-placed managed to wrangle spots in the Reserve and National Guard units. Of the many tragedies of Vietnam, this raw class discrimination strikes me as the most damaging to the ideal that all Americans are created equal and owe equal allegiance to our country." Ted Sampley, is Colin Powell pointing his finger there in that autobiography from 1995 towards people like President George Bush?
The sole reason for the organization that I have formed, being formed, it has one purpose, and that is to stop John Kerry. We have no intention of getting involved in anybody else's politics.
Why are you so interested in stopping John Kerry if you're a Vietnam veteran yourself?
Because John Kerry was a Vietnam veteran, and during the Vietnam War, he betrayed American servicemen who were on the battlefield, who were fighting and bleeding with a very cruel enemy, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese.
Now, how did he betray him?
John Kerry went to Vietnam. He served 4 months. He managed to come out with what I call 3 Band-Aid Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, a Bronze Star. He brought those medals back to Washington. He immediately, somehow or another, finagled himself out of the Navy 6 months early so he could join the so-called anti-war protest. And he helped organize what I call a rabid pro-communist organization called Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And through that organization, he gained a world podium and managed to categorize all Vietnam vets and all military men on the battlefield in Vietnam as baby killers and rapists. I resented it then, I resent it now. He's now campaigning to be president of the United States, which means he'll be commander-in-chief of all the military, and we're going to attempt to stop him.
Now, Bil Davis, let me bring you in here. You're the national coordinator for Vietnam Veterans Against the War. Feel free to respond to that statement. But also, obviously, the Newsweek reported this week in its issue that George Bush served honorably, did his job, and even asked to be considered for missions in Vietnam. Do you think George Bush's National Guard service is going to be a lasting issue for veterans like yourself?
Well, I believe it's a lasting issue for veterans, and it will remain an issue, just as John Kerry's situation will be an issue for veterans. Whether it will be an issue that turns the election could be questionable, given the fact that Mr. Kerry and Mr. Bush both were in the military. And as you recall, Bill Clinton was tagged a draft dodger in his election, and it had very little impact. Now, veterans make up a large segment of the population, but I think the American population is driven primarily by their gut feelings on how their lives and the quality of their lives are affected, and those lives and that economy will be a determining factor that turns this election.
Well, what's your gut fact? What's your gut feeling about these two men? They're both Vietnam veterans. They both served their country during the war. They didn't run off to Canada. What's your gut about them and this controversy that surrounds them?
Of course, there's a lot of people, and there were sons of the rich and famous who were able to get ahead of other people and get in line to get into Guard and Reserve units. People freely admit that they took that option, just like many other people took the option of using whatever deferments they could.
But what's your gut, though? I want to hear. Do you
my
think
gut feeling on the whole thing?
Your gut feeling.
I don't think George Bush finished his commitment, and I have not seen. I haven't seen any information. I haven't seen any information on how he completed his service, and they still haven't proved the documentation.
I would like to know how
John Kerry was so well liked by the Vietnamese, they shot him 3 times. Now,
well, that's not true.
All right.
He wasn't wounded 3 times.
They didn't shoot him 3 times.
Let me bring in. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I want to know how John Kerry managed to get out of the Navy 6 months early.
You know, the people talking about being spit on in airports and baby killers and rapists, now, I personally never experienced that. I've heard a lot of people say they have experienced it. One of the descriptions was they were spit on when they got off the plane from Vietnam.
Are you a war criminal?
The problem with being spit on when you get off the plane from Vietnam is you got off the plane on military installations, which makes it very difficult.
Ted, respond.
If it was the same hippie spitting on people at an airport in San Francisco, the guy had pretty overactive saliva.
Get your point. Ted, respond.
I want to know, I want to ask him, do you consider yourself a war criminal?
Myself? No, I do not.
Well, John Kerry categorized you one in 1971.
No, John Kerry didn't. John Kerry...
yes, he did.
Well, he had a very brief stint in the Organization of Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and I think it's fair to say that John had another agenda, and he was going to move into private practice and eventually into politics.
In other words, he used the veterans on the field, or the military on the field that were fighting, and the veterans that came home as a stepping stone for his political agenda.
Let me bring in David. Guys, I'm sorry, we got to bring in David Dreyer right now. David, you've heard this debate that's been going on for the past few weeks. The Vietnam debate is still with us. Should we expect to hear the Republicans in the next 6 to 9 months reliving that testimony that that John Kerry gave in 1971, accusing his fellow soldiers of war crimes?
Well, I'll tell you what I really think is going to happen here, Joe, and that is I think we should all go back and look at what John Kerry said in 1992 when he was moving forward with his defense of Bill Clinton, that being, this is an issue which is divisive, and we shouldn't look at how or in what way someone served there. I think that the debate that you have taking place right now is an interesting one, but I think it is true. By the time we get down to this election, the focus is going to end up being on who is, in fact, providing the best service in the military possible, and I believe George W. Bush has been an amazing commander-in-chief during one of the most difficult, tumultuous, militarily challenging times in the over 200-year history of the United States of America, that being dealing with the war on terrorism and the problems in Iraq, and then, of course, the challenges in North Korea and Libya and all over. I mean, I think that we have seen phenomenal service by George W. Bush. That's what the American people, including veterans, are going to be focusing on come the fall of this year.
Yeah, let me bring in Lawrence O'Donnell. Lawrence O'Donnell, if George Bush has done such a remarkable job as a wartime president, why do his numbers keep slipping? Let me show you. Let me put up, if we can, we've got the president's poll numbers going up against John Kerry, and right now he's losing in the latest Washington Post poll 52% to 43%. It seems, as somebody that observes this day in, day out, that the president is getting weaker by the day, and that John Kerry's getting stronger by the day. Why doesn't the White House fight back?
Well, it is a day-by-day game, Joe, and it hasn't been good for the president lately because we've been talking about Vietnam. He will not gain a single percentage point on any day that this campaign is talking about Vietnam. What the president has to talk about, and talk about convincingly, is how his handling on the war on terror has helped the United States and helped make the world safer. He has to make a case convincingly about the wisdom of going to war in Iraq. He has to make a convincing positive case that in next year he will better handle the aftermath in Iraq than John Kerry would handle the aftermath in Iraq. As long as we are consumed with a discussion of who did what during the Vietnam War, George Bush and his campaign is not able to make that case. And I don't think it is to the credit of MSNBC to allow Ted Sampley to come back on this air and lie about John Kerry after Ted, I have full respect for your service in Vietnam. I have no respect for the lies that you have tried to sell.
What's the lie? Hold on a second.
John
Kerry. What are the specific lies?
First of all, Ted, very specifically in the transcript of this show, has lied by saying that John Kerry accused every serviceman in Vietnam of being a baby killer. That is a lie, Ted. It's part of a huge package
How many
of lies.
thousand did he accuse?
It's a huge...
All right, Ted, respond.
He never applied a number to any kind of atrocities, and you know that atrocities did occur in Vietnam.
All right, Lawrence, let's let Ted respond. Go ahead, Ted.
John knows that. And John McCain, Republican Senator John McCain, has said you're a liar and has said it for years.
Lawrence, let Ted respond. What are you talking about when you're saying that John Kerry has accused Vietnam veterans of being war criminals? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the testimony that John Kerry gave in 1971 in front of the Fulbright committee, in which he gave a long statement talking about Vietnam veterans in general as being baby killers,
That's
murderers,
a lie.
rapists.
Read the testimony. Don't make it up, Ted.
Do you have the testimony?
Is what John McCain said about that testimony when he was
Okay, guys, hold on, guys. Listen, we're going to continue this right after the break.
Obviously, like what John McCain said.
Okay, well, we'll let you do that after the break, Ted. Obviously, a very heated debate about Vietnam, about John Kerry, and about whether that's going to hurt his presidential bid or whether it's going to hurt George Bush's. That's coming up. Now, almost half of Americans say that President Bush doesn't have their trust. Is he going to be able to win it back with all this National Guard controversy? We'll debate that. And then we're back, and right now we're going to go back to Ted Sampley. Ted, you obviously wanted to say something about John McCain and what he had to say about this issue.
John McCain in 1973 in May did a story with U.S. News and World Report. His quote was, and I'll paraphrase it, and you can look it up yourself, is basically, at that time, which was right at 71, I think it was March, the gooks, was his quote, were bombarding us with anti-war quotes from people in high places back in Washington. This was the most effective propaganda they had against us, speeches and statements by men who were generally well thought of in Washington, and he specified Fulbright and the Fulbright Committee.
All right, let me bring in right now Katrina Vanden Heuvel. Katrina, I want to read this quote that John Kerry said in 1971 before the Senate that's created this firestorm tonight, and I may create a firestorm in this war, in this campaign. He accused his fellow troops of war crimes, saying U.S. troops, quote, raped, cut off ears, cut off heads, taped wires from portable telephones to human genitals, cut off limbs, blew up bodies, randomly shot at civilians, razed villages in fashion reminiscent of Genghis Khan, shot cattle and dogs for fun, poisoned food stocks, and generally ravaged the countryside of South Vietnam. Katrina, does that sound like John Kerry was accusing his fellow troops of war crimes in 1971? And if he did, should that matter in 2004 to the electorate?
John Kerry is a double hero. John Kerry went to Vietnam
we know his
and
record.
fought, he came back, and he opposed the war honorably in order not to discredit his fellow soldiers, not to betray them, as this man you have on your program says, but to save their lives.
But
and today,
Katrina,
you know,
hold on a second. Katrina, hold on. I'm going to let
Joe,
you
you
talk.
asked me a question. Let me just
did.
say that
but,
today in the
Katrina,
newspaper,
but I want to go back, though. Katrina, hold on a second.
I'm going to go back.
You had said, though,
Joe,
that he honored. Hold on. That he let's let Katrina talk here. That you said he honored his troops when he came back. But you read that quote, you got to admit that is some very shocking stuff. Some
Joe,
very nasty accusations.
How do we honor our country? We honor it not by what George Bush is doing to our country today, by not telling Americans the truth. We do it by telling the truth. Read the New York Times today. There is an inquiry about to take place, not about My Lai, which I hope many students, Americans, remember and understand, but about what happened. What happened?
Also, if you're going to talk about it, let's talk about the millions of boat people that the communists run out of Vietnam.
Okay, hold on a second. Let's speak everybody. Here's the deal. Hold on a second. Katrina, I want you to respond to my statement, and then I want to go to David Dry.
But I'm speaking about the fact that we can't ignore reality. There were atrocities. There is a story in the New York Times today about an investigation about to take place of the 101st Airborne Division's Tiger Force, which is currently fighting in Iraq, which in 1967 is alleged to have killed unarmed Vietnamese. We need to know these truths in order to establish the decency of this country. And I think that this issue may not surface in this campaign in a big way. What will surface is that this administration is out of touch with reality.
David Dreyer, let me bring you in here and respond.
Let me just say that is absolutely outrageous. This campaign is going to focus on the fact that we have not seen a terrorist attack in the United States of America since September 11th of 2001. We also need to look at the question that Lawrence raised earlier, which I think is a very appropriate one. What kind of leadership would John Kerry provide in the post-war Iraq world? Well, this guy, as we well know, was an opponent of the liberation of Kuwait in 1991, and during this conflict, we saw him, of course, vote in favor of the resolution to proceed in Iraq, and then vote and saying that he supports the troops, and then vote against providing the resources that the troops needed so that they could do their job. So what is going to happen? What is going to happen, Joe, in a post-war Iraq?
Joe, I have
that's
something.
Really
President
what we need to look at is strong
to the accusation.
Hold on a second, everybody. We can only have one person talk at a time, and I want you to finish your comments, David. And then you brought up Lawrence O'Donnell. I'll bring him in next. Go ahead, finish up, David.
I'm done.
All right, then Lawrence O'Donnell, I want to bring you back in here because obviously you've spoken very passionately about what John Kerry did in 1971. I want to read you, though, what Newsweek said today. They reported that one of John Kerry's boatmates in Vietnam didn't appreciate the senator's anti-war speech that we were just talking about. He said, quote, watching his former Swift boat captain testify on TV, Jim Wasser felt, quote, angry and betrayed, and that was in the cover story of this week's Newsweek. You certainly can understand, Lawrence, even though I, like you, celebrate everybody's right to protest any war, you can certainly understand why a lot of Vietnam veterans would feel angry and betrayed at the testimony of John Kerry.
I understand absolutely why some of them felt that way, and I understand why Ted feels the way he does. My objection to what Ted does in these public appearances is that he lies. He says that he changes what the Kerry statement is into something else. That I can't abide. What John Kerry did, more than Ted Sampley and more than anyone who did not protest the war, John Kerry saved lives. John Kerry saved my life. Let's get that straight.
He did not save one American life. If anything, he caused the communists to fight harder by giving them aid and comfort.
Ted, you're lying. He did nothing to help the communists, and that is a cheap lie that is beneath you. I will tell you how he saved my life. I was scheduled to be drafted and sent to Vietnam if drafted because I was perfectly healthy. But because the anti-war protest was so effective and because John Kerry's leadership of it was so effective and strong, he forced Richard Nixon to end the draft a week after I was called up for my physical, so I didn't have to go because brave protesters like John Kerry stopped the war to save lives, including mine.
All right,
so don't tell me who was patriotic.
Joe, can I speak to some of this,
Sure, Bill, go ahead.
All right. First of all, the speech that John Kerry gave to Congress was a summation that was derived from a film called The Winter Soldier Investigation. In 1970, in Detroit, Michigan, and across in Canada, in Windsor, Canada, American veterans all of them with their discharge papers and
Not
all
true.
their credentials, testified about their experiences in Vietnam. Across the river were a number of Vietnamese people who had lived and actually survived some of these same situations. A lot of this documentation was done.
You want to talk
the
about
movie won an
distortion. There you go.
award as the best documentary at the Cannes Film Festival that year, and that it's a full-length film detailing one veteran after another's testimony on what he actually saw.
But
and
Bill
things that
Davis,
he actually did
Bill,
in Vietnam.
I had read though, Bill.
John
Hold on a
Kerry's
second.
speech
Hold on a second.
Was digested and
Right.
a summation of that investigation.
But Bill, I thought I had read just this past week that movie, that investigation, had in fact been discredited.
I think
By whom?
Well, but by people that went back, the reports, the wires had reported that actually they had made up some people's names, they had made up some facts, and that it was just all blown up together.
You know, Joe,
Have you seen the film?
with all
Katrina,
due
go ahead.
Have you
deference,
seen
with
the
all due
film or
deference,
investigated?
No,
Joe,
I read the newspapers.
You're always going to have a situation where people are constantly trying to revise history.
All right, Katrina,
There are people that
respond.
say-
Can we talk about the present day?
People are-
Katrina,
people are
respond.
gonna say that-
Listen, guys,
you know,
cut everybody's
I've heard people say the
microphone.
Vietnam War was a
Guys,
good
cut
war.
everybody's microphone. Cut everybody's microphone. Katrina, you respond. Go.
Talking about discrediting, talking about rewriting, could we bring this up to the present? Because we have an administration that has misled this nation into war and that has overextended U.S. forces, has strained the reserves, has alienated U.S. allies. Those are not my words. That is former Bush spokeswoman Margaret Tutwiler saying that this administration has led to deterioration of relations with the world in a way that will take decades to repair. I think we need to look at what this administration is doing to veterans and to the military today and bring that into this discussion, because that is what President Bush will be judged on, in addition to the fact that, as I think Lawrence O'Donnell said, this administration is out of touch with the everyday realities of Americans' lives, the kitchen table issues that make Americans anxious, the outsourcing of
That
jobs,
is outrageous.
skyrocketing
That is
healthcare
absolutely
costs,
outrageous,
the
Katrina.
fact
All right.
that this administration is in the
we've been
hip
able to
pocket
focus
of
on a wide
immigration.
range of
David
very
Dreyer,
positive
hold on a
things.
second, David. I'm going to have to give you the final word. Go ahead.
And the rabid
Well, the fact of the matter is we've seen real improvement in our economy. We've obviously been able to see strong military leadership. Are we dealing with a difficult situation in Iraq? Absolutely. We didn't want this situation that we faced, but the threat that existed is a very, very serious one. And we have in the White House someone who's been willing to step up to the plate and do the single most important thing that the federal government has to do, and that is focus on providing for the common defense. And at the same time, we're creating good jobs in this country. The economy is moving. And I will tell you, at the kitchen tables that Katrina's talking about, we are seeing things getting better.
All right. Thank you so much, Congressman David Dreyer. I appreciate it.
But I do admire John Kerry's service. I should say that for the record, too, Joe.
And I think all of us do here for what he did over in Vietnam. And the continuing question will be about what he did when he came home. And that's what this debate's all about. I appreciate you being here, Congressman. Thank you, Ted Sampley, Bil Davis, Lawrence O'Donnell, as always. Thank you so much. And Katrina Vanden Heuvel, we certainly appreciate you being here with us also. And coming up, the president's plan to protect your...